Welcome to another episode of Tech in EdTech, a show where we discuss technology and how it impacts learning and brings digital learning to life for everyone. On today's show, we have Sia Raj Purohit. I've known Sia for more than 6 months now. I've met her at conferences, followed her on LinkedIn. Sia works with AWS, and without further ado, Sia, why don't you introduce yourself? Would love to know more about you.
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Sia, and I lead the education and workforce development verticals at AWS Marketplace. I'm also co-founder of Pathway Ventures, an early stage fund focused on the future of work. But overall, I've worked in edtech for about 10 years now and very passionate about the entire sector.
Great. So, Sia, why don't you tell us about how you got into education? Give us a little bit of background about you, how you got into tech and education, and what motivates you to keep doing this every day.
Yeah, so I first got into the space as an undergrad student. I was studying computer engineering and really not resonating with the way classes were being taught. They were very theoretical, one size fits all, and I saw that a lot of my friends were dropping out of the engineering program because it didn't fit them, what is now called like the pipeline problem. It was 2011, and not enough resources existed online on why someone should study engineering. Because the trade off is not obvious to an 18-year-old in the bubble of a college campus. And it was just a difficult problem when I was thinking about whether I should continue with engineering or try something else. So I wanted to understand why someone should study engineering. So I cold emailed some of the most famous people in Austin, a Nobel laureate, a Supreme Court attorney, professors and authors spanning across verticals to ask them why someone should study engineering. Surprisingly, many of those people responded, and they told me how important an engineering skill set is for a country's growth and how personally fulfilling engineering careers are, but that the way that schools teach it deters smart students from pursuing those majors. So I started writing down these conversations, and that became a book about America's job skills gap that I published in 2012, talking about how universities just need to do a better job of teaching like these engineering careers. That was the same year that Coursera and Udacity launched, and a lot of excitement was being built up in the MOOC space. I got fixated by this idea of like fixing how engineering just to help people feel less locked out of impactful careers. And that's become like the core passion of my life. So I've been early at two Silicon Valley edtech startups, Udacity and Springboard, where I helped build different products and business lines. And I've also worked in venture capital at GSV Ventures, investing in the sector. So again, very passionate about all things thinking about like education to employment pathways, but also just like learning for like job skills.
Wow, that's I didn't know, Sia, that you had a book. I would love to get a copy of that. But what you just mentioned out there was so important. Again, just a little detour. I mean, my background, I studied physical therapy, went into sales. And I was like, how do I use my skills that I learned and apply it to my work? So I'm just resonating with everything that you just said. So thank you for providing that backdrop. I think that's really interesting. So what I mean, coming from that background, the curiosity that you had, and how do you see that manifested today in terms of, let's talk about your role at AWS. What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to create? If you can just throw some light on that.
Absolutely. So AWS is like a powerhouse. The team does a lot in education, everything from supporting early stage edtech startups through AWS EdStart, through working with big companies and hosting education conferences such as AWS Imagine. I'm the education and workforce development lead for AWS Marketplace. AWS Marketplace is a software marketplace. We're doing for software buying what Amazon.com did for all consumer products. So the software buying process is complex, both for businesses and public sector organizations, including school districts or especially school districts. And we want to remove that friction from that process. So I'm building up these verticals and working with education companies of all sizes to enable the sales process for them to be easier. My dream is that, like in the next 5 years, we can remove a lot of hurdles in the education procurement process because there's so much cool tech coming up that is not making it into the hands of students because of the hurdles in procurement. And hopefully, a company like AWS can help fix that, just given the resources and reach.
We do track all the RFPs that come from schools and districts, right? And when we look at some of those things, you're right. The process is can feel very overwhelming, especially for a new company who wants to start doing something. It
Yeah.
can feel complex. It can feel convoluted. So, and I think one of the things that defines Amazon for me is what you just mentioned, how it has changed the buying experience for a consumer. There's always information synergy. I know what I need to know. The process is very simple. I think the need for simplicity is definitely there, in the education buying. So I think that's a great thing that you're solving for.
And what you said is so spot on. Like, especially for startups, this is such a struggle because sales cycles to schools can take up to 18 months. And that often exceeds the runway that they have from a financial perspective, especially when they're just starting out. So it deters a lot of smart entrepreneurs from building in the K through 12 space because of how long that process is.
Right. I mean, there is another part to the puzzle as well. Is just the adoption of products. But again, there are first is procurement, and then adoption of the products. Let's go a little bit detail into the procurement piece. The process is complex. It is. Can you define some key or highlight some key parts of that complexity? What are the key things that you've seen that makes that process complex and cumbersome?
Yeah. So there are two big reasons. But before that, I think at a high level, the procurement process for K through 12 has been put in place for the safety of students. But the term safety has almost become a cover that's preventing useful tech from reaching the right students. So I see it almost as like the own personal battle of why I got into ed tech. That tech in the classroom right now is one size fits all because there's no way for teachers and school districts to to have procurement be easy enough that they can use different types of tools for different learning styles in the classroom. And edtech products themselves are not diverse enough that they can cater to all of these different learning styles yet. So I think that is like why it's a problem. But very specifically, there are two things that make procurement difficult in K through 12. The first one is that every state has different rules on how education solutions can be purchased. So
Right.
this adds a lot of ambiguity in the process, obviously, for companies looking to sell. So as you mentioned, they have to complete different RFP processes for each state and school district, making that whole process very difficult to scale and taking away resources from innovation and outcomes at these companies. Because you need so much staff to just be able to help navigate this as well as like actually make like these RFPs happen. And of course, you hire consultants and like basically the whole process becomes cumbersome. And then the second piece is about who makes the decision and what information they have. I feel like there's that gap in terms of K through 12 buyers need to better understand the features, quality, and reviews of each given software product. But at many schools, the school's governing body board members determine which software the school should acquire, typically based on personal experiences that their teachers, admins, and parents have had. So the information is limited in terms of discovering new products or helping them get through the screening process. We often hear stories and people are like, oh, my parents use Blackboard, so we're using Blackboard now because now parents enter the school board. So I think things like that in terms of information discovery and then ease of policy will help make this easier.
Right. There's a lot to unpack over there. But yes, in fact, just looking at those adoption cycles, looking at those RFPs itself, as I said, for a smaller business, I'll just give you an example. See, there was this one particular tool that I saw. What I found was so relevant. What it does is you have all these video lectures recorded in your LMS.
Mhm.
This uses AI and ML to search for a term that is there in one of those videos. So, because nobody has the time to go through hundreds of video lectures, but let's say you want to search about force or Newton's law of motion in one of those videos, you can just type it and it will show the videos that has it. It's such a good. I mean, I found that was a pretty useful tool, but it's a
Yeah.
small startup. Now, for them, the biggest challenge is how do I test it out? How do I sell it? It's just a maze of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, feature adoption is even trickier, like in terms of will they be bundled with something else? Will they try to sell independently? Like, very tricky to get this kind of tool plugged in to the existing maze in K through 12 buying.
Yes. Now, so we heard the problems. I think most of the audience, if not all, will agree with that issue. So tell me a little bit about what is your goal and how are you and AWS? I mean, when I say you, also means AWS trying to solve some of those challenges, because it requires it's not a very simple problem. It will require solution on the supply side and the demand side. So how are you trying to navigate that?
Yeah. So basically, as I mentioned, AWS Marketplace is a marketplace of software products. So what we're doing is taking out some of the hurdles in the procurement process and using, like, I guess, both tech as well as like our sales team to kind of make that process easier. So how it works is basically very similar to the .com experience for consumer products. You can navigate the different solutions that are available on Marketplace, identify and buy off the shelf in terms of the types of products that you need. But then you can also have custom private offers, which are custom like negotiated terms between the buyer and seller. And that transaction can also happen through Marketplace. So basically, Marketplace wants to increase speed, enable easier governance because AWS bills the customer and takes, like, basically disperses the payments to sellers and just makes that experience much easier, kind of like an app store experience almost, but for school districts and large scale customers. So right now, large edtech companies such as Coursera, Pluralsight, Udacity, Udemy, Blackboard, D2L, these kind of companies are already selling on Marketplace. And the goal is to really help grow that, to enable K through 12 school districts and enterprise buyers to have a variety of options, and then also to be able to go through that purchasing process much more quickly in a matter of days instead of the months that it typically takes.
Right. This does seem like a much smoother process, and especially for somebody, as I said, for somebody, it brings in the aspect of access in place. There is, one of the things that because this is RFP driven, there is so many hurdles there. There can also be information asymmetry, which is another big problem. So I think having kind of a marketplace helps. Now, question. So you mentioned about the tool side. What about the buyers, right? How do you plan to get the buyers on board in terms of changing some of those ways of procuring tools?
Yeah. So, as far as like the AWS model itself goes, we have different types of account managers covering every type of AWS customer. And those account managers help enable the customer to purchase from AWS. So right now, the majority of AWS buyers, AWS marketplace buyers are existing AWS customers. So we have about 325,000 different organizations purchasing from marketplace, but that's growing really quickly. And then as far as bringing K through 12 school districts on, what's been interesting is that we've seen a lot of these school districts almost leapfrog other AWS technology and start using marketplace as their first point of interaction with AWS. And this is huge because I guess these school districts are also fed up of like the process it takes them to buy like different software and see marketplace as an easier way. So we have different sales teams focused entirely on school districts, bringing them online, helping them identify the best products for them, and also helping track those outcomes and see like what makes sense year over year for their student base.
That's very fascinating. That is amazing. To be very honest, that being able to do that would just really make that process simpler. No, that's very helpful, Sia. And the scale that AWS has, I think I'm guessing that it can also make that access easier. So how can AWS make that access easier? How can it improve affordability? If you want to talk a little bit about that, how do you plan to leverage the scale that you have to be able to make it easier for everyone?
Yeah. So I'll share my personal dream right now, again, like a year into building this up. And of course, the market will kind of tell us where to go from here. But the personal dream is to have like every edtech company sell through AWS Marketplace and enable schools to have like that kind of optionality and also just like the speed of being able to acquire. Like we should take less resources in the middle procurement process and make that just much faster, and then also add in things such as like reviews and outcomes. So, like, I don't understand why we can't do reviews like the App Store does for apps for all of these education products, enabling us to be able to collect that data from teachers and classrooms, bubble that up more easily to school districts, and then actually use that to impact how edtech companies build, right? So I think that is something that we'd love to explore as well, like in terms of getting deeper into reviews, making buying easier, step one. Step two is just like growth in terms of bringing more school districts on, bringing like enabling more of these transactions. And then step three is thinking about these like reviews and outcomes and what that means for how education products are assessed, essentially. So, and then
Right.
simultaneously also actually think a lot about education policy and how we can help rewrite some of that to take into account some of these technology advancements that enable education to be like updated so much more frequently than it was like when I was going to school, when we had like Blackboard for 12 years or Instructure for 4 years or any of those kind of products.
Right. On the review piece and getting teachers, because at the end of the day, you want to understand from the users how their experience is and whether a particular product eases their burden or adds to their burden.
Yeah,
And I think that that review process is again this kind of adds to that information symmetry piece of it, right? I want to know how others are feeling before I about this product before I go and buy that. So I think getting some sort of scale to that entire review, because I know reviews do exist now, but getting that scale to that review process will help buyers make a better choice. No,
absolutely. And then also this kind of central platform also opens up like more direct feedback. So like it would be amazing. Like of course companies collect this independently with their customers, but what if we had like that kind of information across the board on how teachers like use a product or what features they request, or like basically a call for startups coming from teachers. Like all of this would be possible once we get more like standardized reviews and data on these products and their performance.
right, and that's the other piece that I wanted to like double click on the reviews and outcomes. Like outcomes is a big thing in learning and edtech, right? Because at the end of the day, education does have like for some it is career readiness, upskilling, jobs. So if there's a way we can get outcomes using some of these advancement, I think that will be a huge win for everyone. How do we track those, like okay, this tool, the technology or the pedagogy, how did it help in getting to that outcome? I think that was the other piece that I wanted to focus on from what you just said.
Yeah.
Yep.
And honestly, the solution might be something like outcomes based pricing, being able to actually measure usage of products and then actually seeing like whatever results based on those pieces and then pricing it accordingly. Something like that could be very unique for education. Right now, obviously, there's like this almost chicken and egg problem in terms of that school districts and edtech companies almost blame each other for like lack of outcomes or lack of visibility there. EdTech products say the school districts aren't using the tools sufficiently enough to showcase those outcomes. And school districts say that the education products are not enabling those outcomes. So just having more visibility and perhaps changing the pricing structure to enable like that usage based model could be interesting as well. Instead of like the like license based like butts and seats as they call it
Yep.
format.
Yep. No, I think those are some great ideas. Apart from what you do at AWS, yeah, you've been in edtech for a while. You're very passionate about education. You're also an investor. So edtech has changed a lot in the last, especially since COVID, obviously, but over the last, let's say, 5 years to 10 years. If someone is to break into edtech space today, you as an investor or as an operator, what are some of the advice that you would give them?
Yeah. It's actually been fascinating. Like, it's an incredible time to be in ed tech. In 2019, like pre-pandemic, I wrote a blog post about how the time will come when people stop seeing ed tech as a social impact category and see that we're actually one of the most important and profitable sectors because we help people earn a living, which is like crucial, it's recession proof, it's like very essential to like how society works. And I think that time is here. Like edtech obviously saw significant growth during the pandemic. And honestly, even given, or maybe like especially given that uncertainty in the market, these solutions are very much needed. So I think it's a great time to get into ed tech, either in the workforce development category to like help people upskill for new jobs, learn employable skills, or have the communities around them to support that growth, or in K through 12, like given how savvy like young learners are these days, we're going to need to see those solutions on education content, student assessments, like out of school activities and the school admin and communication stuff. So basically, across the board, edtech companies are hiring. AWS has 40 to 50 open roles in edtech globally right now. So obviously, like check that out as well for anyone who's looking to break into the sector. But I guess as far as advice goes, I guess two different pieces of advice. One is for teachers transitioning, and the other is for like operators. So for teachers themselves, in the past couple months, I've gotten like dozens of teachers reach out about like wanting to transition to ed tech. And I think that like the best advice for them is to find companies that work closely with teachers and would benefit from that perspective. So K through 12 companies like like Clever, Newsella, OutSchool are very teacher centric. And so find a way to share that like classroom experience to influence the operations growth or product at those companies. So like come at it very much from like this is what I saw in the classroom. These are the types of ways that we can reach other people who do the job that I used to do, and how we can help either build or grow into that space. And then for operators transitioning into edtech, basically, of course, they'll transition like the functional capacity of their role, but it's super important to highlight that passion for education. I think what makes edtech so cool is that the sector is still small enough that that passion for the product really matters. Like a decade ago at Udacity, I remember seeing my colleagues and they were all like children of teachers or like passionate educators, and they've all gone on to build such amazing things in the sector. So I think that mission orientation piece is still like critical to the DNA of edtech companies, and like showcasing that is super important in order to like break into edtech now.
Right. And just, I mean, I work in a company which has EdTech in its name, right? So I remember that before COVID, not a lot of people would understand. I'm talking about back home in India, a lot of my folks. Okay, but after COVID, when I said that I work in an EdTech company, everybody knew. Not only
Yeah.
did they knew, they're like, oh, this is great that is you work in this. My son or my daughter uses this tool. So I think the awareness has leapfrogged a lot. The second thing is I read an article, I think a few months back by Reach Capital, if I'm not mistaken, which spoke about every company is going to be an edtech company.
Hmm.
And it really resonated with me because even corporate, like you are always upskilling, you're always learning. So if you go by that context, every company is an edtech company. So yes, just wanted to highlight that, and this is really an exciting time to be in the space. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And for your personal information diet, right? What do you read? How do you get your edtech news? Who are the people you follow?
Yeah. So, three awesome sources that I read every week. One is Matthew Tower, who runs a great newsletter and is a close friend. The second is Ryan Craig from Achieve Partners. I really appreciate his thoughts in the sector. He has been in the space for like a long time now, and his perspective is very valuable. And then the third is probably the writer of the post you mentioned about every company being an edtech company, Tony Wan from Reach Capital. So highly recommend those three.
Yeah, I have subscribed to Reach Capital's blogs. I obviously get Matthew Towers newsletters every Sunday. I think they are amazing. I would definitely look out for the other source that you mentioned. This is very helpful. Last but not the least, what are you learning these days?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to get smarter about education policy right now. There's obviously so much to unpack in that space, but trying to understand more about like how the U.S. Department of Education fits into like the edtech sector almost, and how like they collaborate with like the different school districts and like how they think through policy as well. So I'm a big fan of what Schmidt Futures is doing, and people like Kumar Girk there who are like thinking about education policy and how it impacts like ed tech. So just trying to get smarter about that space right now.
Great. And one of the things about that is education policies and labor policies and all of these areas have become so intermingled, especially when you
Mhm.
look at workforce readiness piece of it, right?
Yeah,
So I think that policy piece is, and the way it is changing, it's definitely something very exciting. I'm particularly very excited about. I read some of those papers that are published by Department of Ed. Sia, thank you so much for joining the show. It was a pleasure having you. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to add? Any plug? Feel free to. This is your time, your space.
amazing. Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm really like trying to dive deep into education procurement. So if anyone is building cool things in the space or thinking about the policy piece behind that, I'd love to get in touch. Please reach out over LinkedIn. It'd be amazing to connect. Thanks so much.
Yes. Yep, thank you so much. And for audience, I'll have Sia's LinkedIn and we'll have all the links that she's mentioned in the show notes. So feel free to check them out and do connect with Sia. She has some amazing content on LinkedIn. Thanks, Sia. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Have a good one.